So welcome back to another episode of Better Call Shaul. We have with us today, we're lucky to have David Drapkin all the way from New York, Five Towns, right?
Teaneck, New Jersey, but yeah,
Teaneck.
Close
Okay,
enough.
sorry.
I'm a
Mix it up all
Brummie
the
at heart.
time. Yeah.
Lots of
Uh,
Jews in both places.
yeah, both have Jewish communities. Yeah. So we had a couple episodes ago. Shaul and I spoke about psychedelics and any mind-altering substance with regards to using it to enhance one's well-being or one's spiritual state. And then someone put us in touch with David and said, "Hey, why don't you get in contact with him?" So David's been a licensed therapist for over 15 years.
Yeah.
And although you've just told us you don't practice psychedelic assisted therapy, but it's something that you're very involved with at the moment in this stage of your life. And we'd love to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shaul, you wanted
So yeah, I just wanted to jump straight in and ask two questions. Is it legal and is it dangerous, basically?
Oh, two big ones.
The two biggies. The two biggies. Let's not beat around the bush,
Yeah, so there's a lot of misunderstandings and stigma and fear around psychedelics and what they are.
Absolutely.
It's coming from, what's called, in a sense, the age of prohibition, when research was banned, when use was criminalized. It's kind of like a dark ages of psychedelic use, medicine, and spirituality. So I can definitely help to destigmatize some of it. So unfortunately, most psychedelics are still criminalized in America. So that means if anyone possesses any, in most states in America at least, they could be arrested, could get convicted of possession. Use is also illegal. There's a quirky little bit of law with psilocybin containing mushrooms, and psilocybin's the kind of psychoactive part of the magic mushroom, as we call it. So you're allowed to own spores of them, but you're not allowed to kind of germinate the spores of the mushroom. So if you just collect them, that's fine, but if you germinate them and then want to ingest them, that's the illegal bit. But yeah, most psychedelics in America, other than a few states, say Colorado, Oregon, Santa Cruz in California, plus others in Massachusetts, have decriminalized, which means it's the lowest level of criminal offense. Really, it's just a ticking off. But for most of the rest of America, yeah, it's still a Schedule 1 drug, and you could get convicted for possession or use.
So how can you do therapy with, I don't know, encouraging people to do it? I mean, do you encourage? Is that how it works? To maybe tell us a bit how it works with that.
Yeah, there's a huge amount to go into. So I guess I'll talk about what is legal right now in America, and then part two is what's being done that's not legal in America and around the world. Psychedelics
we won't ask you to tell us about the illegal part of what you do.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure there is
I can talk about some of my personal experiences with psychedelics. That's okay. I just don't mention kind of dates or places. I keep it a bit more deliberately vague.
Yeah.
But yeah, psychedelics are honestly relatively safe compared to, say, alcohol, tobacco, or cocaine or heroin. They generally have a better safety profile. There's a very famous professor in England called David Nutt, N-U-T-E. Professor Nutt was the drug czar of the government, maybe David Cameron's government, that did a research into drug policy reform, and is the scheduling system in England working, and does it make sense? And he came back to the government and said, after my extensive report, I've realized that your drug policy is completely ludicrous and it needs to be completely overhauled. And at which point he was fired and the report was castigated. So, and he's one of the world's foremost scientists that's been researching drugs effect on the brain and on the body for decades. And he came out with this wonderful conclusion, looking at all the harms of drugs in the world, going from tobacco and alcohol at the worst all the way down to, say, caffeine at the least. The psychedelics were actually at the lower end of this harm profile. And he said, if alcohol is legal, then why are all these other things that are less harmful than alcohol not legal? And he compared it to horse riding. He said, taking mushrooms, LSD, DMT, is less risky and less harmful than riding a horse. You're more likely to ride a horse. So if you want to make drugs illegal, then make horse riding illegal as well.
Right. And they're not chemically addictive substances as well, right?
Very few of them are. So because they come with very challenging inner experiences that are not really for thrill seekers or hedonists. They're very disruptive. They're kind of ego melting. They bring up trauma. They bring up kind of emotional volatility, uncertainty, and they can be quite epistemologically shattering around the sense of self and the concept of reality. So very few people would want to get addicted to that, or can, and they don't have much of a dependence profile, other than say ketamine and MDMA do have a potential abuse piece.
Right. You're talking a little bit gibberish to me here with all these names. I have a sense of them.
Yeah.
So you've got mushrooms. I understand mushrooms are mushrooms that kind of grow. You can go find them in the forest, I think, even, you know, in various places. Or you could, as you say, mass produce them for yourself, but that'd be illegal in America. LSD, that is technically another psychedelic. And MDMA, would you say those are the three main ones, or is it more than that?
There's DMT as well, ketamine.
Yeah.
Right.
And these are all different.
There's
all different things.
There are many different types, and there's also
DMT.
kind of variations of their molecular structure that makes them slightly different. So right now there's a lot of research happening, clinical trials around the world, trying to tweak the molecule of different psychedelic compounds so that it lasts a bit longer, or lasts a bit shorter, or has less nausea perhaps. Or less hallucinatory effects. But yeah, there's really dozens of different types. The one we all know is magic mushrooms, right. But in the world that I work in, we call them psilocybin containing mushrooms, because psilocybin breaks down to psilocin, and it's psilocin that activates the 5-HT2A receptor in the brain. That's the kind of the serotonin receptor of the brain, and that's what most psychedelic substances activate, that one receptor in the brain. And it's related to Robin Carhart-Harris's paper about the default mode network that really opens up the brain through this process of entropy, so that the normal pattern of the brain being locked into quite rigid, predictable thought patterns, so we only really use a very tiny part of our brain. Psychedelics enable that default mode network to experience entropy, so that other parts of the brain actually start to become alive again, and to communicate with each other, other parts of the brain, but also of the spirit and soul. So it's not just brain, it's not even just consciousness, it's actually kind of soul and spiritual, as well as physical, the body, where a lot of our trauma is kept.
Okay. Just to say on that, at this point, I was going to talk about this a little bit later on, but it sounds like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the way I see it is that the human being is a soul, but that soul kind of gets filtered through our thinking, our thought process, our brain, let's call it. And if you quieten down the brain, or kind of interfere with its natural processes, it allows the soul to kind of have more of a say. It allows the soul to kind of get out a little more. It's not inhibited anymore. You take away the inhibitions of the soul, and so the soul will kind of come to the fore in whatever way it does.
Kind of like quiets down the mind in a way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Quiets down thoughts.
Something along those lines. Is
that's my understanding of it as a spiritual man. Yeah. And as a therapist. Yeah. That's exactly what happens. You know, different people have different words for soul or spirit or God consciousness, but DMT, I can't remember what that stands for. That's found in something called ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is found in the Amazon. It's a combination of a few main plants, but particularly two. You boil them for about 10 hours. It's been used for centuries, and that contains DMT. And DMT is known as the God particle, or the spirit particle. And there's a man called Rick Strassman, actually Jewish man, very lovely bloke over here in America. He was the first person to do clinical experiments in the 1990s on behalf of the government with people that had, I think, addiction as their primary, maybe cocaine addiction, I think. But yeah, there's also cacti that contain DMT as well. Mescaline and peyote contain this psychedelic compound.
And some of these substances are actually used to help people get off of other more harmful drugs, like things like cocaine or heroin, from what I understand, right?
Yeah. So I'm an addiction specialist in my clinical world, and there's quite a few companies that are specializing in psychedelic therapy for addiction, and probably the foremost one in the world is in Bristol, and they've just opened a clinic in London. It's called Awaken, AWAKN, and Professor David Nutt that I just mentioned, he's their, I think, chief science officer there, and so they're specializing in MDMA, which is also known as ecstasy, or ketamine, to treat alcohol use disorder and gambling disorders and addictions as well. And their outcomes from their phase 2 studies were just unbelievable, phenomenal.
Is that because a lot of these addictions come from traumatic experiences, kind of trauma, and then substances like ketamine or psilocybin quiet down the brain and connect areas in the brain that allow the trauma to kind of settle, engage with it, rather than, because I assume with trauma it's that the person's mind always been fighting off an experience and not been able to process it, and that these substances allow a person to process it, thereby having a calmer mind and not needing to be reliant on substances like heroin and body numbing substances.
Yeah, trauma is a huge piece. So having worked in addiction for a long time, probably 90% of people that develop an addiction have some trauma there that hasn't been resolved, hasn't been healed. And probably most of us in the world have trauma that hasn't truly been healed, but we find a way to either suppress it or kind of live with it being not healed. So what the psychedelics can do is they enable a person to, firstly feel kind of relaxed in their body, to feel safe in that moment with who they're talking to, and then their brain and their body actually kind of just integrates within itself, becomes whole again. And so that anything that isn't whole within us, that isn't kind of integrated into the greater being or soul, kind of says, hey, I need some help because I've been left out here, I've been excluded, I've been rejected, and I need to be loved. That's, in a sense, the process we go through in psychedelic therapy. And so these parts of us where, say, we experienced some trauma, it could be abuse, or it could just be more a subtle thing. Like, a lot of people speak about a memory that comes up when they were really young and they didn't realize that was traumatic. But when they re-experience it during a psychedelic session, or maybe in the weeks afterwards when they're processing what happened, they have this memory come up that when I was 6 years old, that person said they didn't want to be my friend anymore. Or when I was 15 years old, my girlfriend or boyfriend dumped me. I didn't realize that hurt me so much, but something inside of me broke, or I kind of inculcated a negative sense of self or a negative belief about me and my life and who I am and how people see me that has never gone away. And if I can just be personal with you, about a year ago, I had a very powerful experience with psilocybin containing mushrooms. I was using those, in a clinical setting, in a sense, even though it wasn't in a clinic. So I won't provide any more exact details about that. But yeah, I was going through a 6-hour session, just lying on the floor with some cushions, eye goggles on in the dark with some soft, gentle, floaty music playing. And about 3, 4, maybe 4 hours into it, this memory came back that wasn't a memory of an event. It was a stored memory of a belief that I hate myself. And so at the moment that this huge kind of volcanic belief about myself just purged out of me, and I just said those 3 words, I hate myself, I just burst out into hysterical tears. And something inside of me ever since has felt different. And I've been able to kind of do more work on myself in the last year around that piece and that trauma. So that's not event specific. It's just kind of narrative specific and kind of ego identity specific. So those are the kinds of experiences that people have. And we use the term integration for what happens afterwards, like the meaning making of my psychedelic experience. So it's taking me a year to kind of process that. And some people right now in America, ketamine is the only legal psychedelic. Thousands of clinics have sprung up in the last couple of years and they're not covered by insurance. So they're usually around $600 to $1,000 a session with either intramuscular injections or IV intravenous usage, or potentially a ketamine lozenge or tablet. Those are the 3 methods. Very expensive, but people are doing it now in America a lot more commonly. And the integration piece is the therapy bit. Is like, so what happened? What do I understand from that? How do I interpret that? How do I make these changes last in my life? So yeah, lots to talk about there.
Is the therapy, just talking about the therapy part of it, is the therapy something like it would be guided by a therapist, the actual session, or is the therapy more based on post a psilocybin session to follow up in the coming weeks or months or years on their experience, or is it both?
Yeah, good question. So there's different types. Some of the therapy is happening in clinical trial settings because there's dozens of companies now with their own molecule and their own clinical protocols that they're trying to get intellectual property and patents around so they can then go to market with it. So those are very specific clinically driven protocols. Whereas what's happening in some of the ketamine clinics It might not have such advanced protocols around the therapy, but more and more clinics now are say they're going to have at least 3 sessions of therapy before you have ketamine, and then probably at least 2 sessions of therapy between ketamine session 1 and ketamine session 2. And most people that have treatment-resistant major depressive disorder, which is the typical diagnosis that people get it for, they have, say, around 4 to 6 ketamine sessions. And yeah, the therapy
are those ketamine sessions on their own, and then they come and speak to the therapist, or is it with the therapist there?
Yeah, good question. So originally ketamine was only going to be used in clinical kind of outpatient settings with a doctor, a nurse, a therapist. Usually a nurse or nurse practitioner does the administration of the injection or the IV, and then the therapist does the talking. But then when COVID happened, people switched their models just as they were launching to being at-home ketamine. So there are 2 big companies now in America, Mind Bloom and New Life, that do at-home ketamine. So they'll do an online telehealth assessment and say, yep, you meet the criteria. We're going to prescribe you ketamine and mail it out to you. When you get your box of ketamine, then we'll schedule a session with our therapist. So you'll take your ketamine at home in your living room, and on Zoom, you'll be talking to a therapist about how you're doing. And then the next day, you'll have another session with them just to start processing what comes up.
Now, why is ketamine legal and the others aren't? What's the difference?
It's because of the scheduling system that President Nixon brought in over in America, I think in 1971. It's called the War on Drugs here. And that's, it wasn't based on science, because at the time there was some amazing research happening around psychedelic use for depression and alcohol abuse in particular. It was the war on drugs and the criminalization of psychedelics was done for political reasons. And so all of the psychedelics were put into Schedule 1, which means if it's Schedule 1, it's the highest level of severity. So it means there is literally that it means there is zero therapeutic benefit of this drug, which is completely false. And the second piece it's saying that it is very addictive and dangerous, which is also completely false. And so it's only now, after 50 years of not being able to research with these drugs, that people are saying that, literally probably hundreds of thousands of people have died and millions of people have had their lives significantly hindered because that research from the 60s and 70s was shut down for 50 years. But ketamine itself is actually in Schedule 3. So that means that people are still able to use it in controlled medical circumstances. And the reason it's Schedule 3 is because it's actually an anesthetic drug that every day in America, and probably in Britain as well, is used in the emergency department in A&E. Every day. Kids have it. If kids have a broken bone, car crash, they'll get ketamine. And it's actually in the United Nations, it's in the World Health Organization essential medicines, ketamine for battlefields and health services, because it's just used as an anesthetic, as a pain med.
Is that also, what's it called? Etanox. I forgot the name of it. There's like a oxygen flow that's given to patients who are in pain. Etanox.
I know what you mean, but I don't know.
I haven't heard of that. Is that like laughing gas?
Yeah, that's
similar, something similar to that.
They
it's
give
like
it to women in labour, no?
I think so. Etanox,
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But so basically, it's what you're saying is kind of which works well. But by the way, is there anything? There's a bit buzzing around his microphone. Is there any?
I think it might be my like the zzz part. I think it might be my laptop.
Oh, fine, but it won't come out. I don't think it won't hear it. Okay, great. So in other words, it's kind of a bit of a loophole with what you're saying. Is that a loophole in the law in that this is used as an anesthetic, so now it's legal, and so now that it's legal, you can kind of use it in different settings, and so now and being that it is a psychedelic as well. So it happens to be there's a legal psychedelic that kind of people can use, and you don't do that. Yes, you don't use ketamine.
I'm literally just about to start. So I'll tell you about the way that I'm going to start using it. But yeah, ketamine, like you were just saying, it is a loophole in a way because it's a drug that's being used mainly for pain and anesthesia. So when we use it in psychiatry or addiction, it's being used off-label, which basically means it's being used not for its primary use, but there is still enough scientific evidence to prove that it is useful and effective in this circumstance for depression and addiction, for example. So there's sufficient evidence to legally, reinforce it. So the way that I'm going to use it in my practice, so there's a few companies that are doing the ketamine in oral form, like a lozenge or tablet. So I'm forming a partnership with a psychiatrist over here that can do the assessments and then prescribing of ketamine for people that have depression. And then they will prescribe to the patients that I work with. They'll be under his treatment for psychiatry and prescribing, but under my treatment for psychotherapy. And then the three of us, the psychiatrist, myself, and the patient, will remain in ongoing communication and kind of supervision about their treatment, so that I could work with those clients. I would only do it in person. I don't really feel comfortable doing it over Zoom. It's just my thing. I'd rather sit down with them in my office and have them lie down and put some music on and go through a session. It probably lasts 2 to 2.5 hours. The average
But have them
session.
take the tablet. Yeah, have them take the tablet and then do the session.
They would take the tablet themselves. Yep, and then they'd walk into my office, settle them down, do a bit of talking, and then away they go. And starting off on low dosages, see how they react to it, and then potentially going up as needed.
And ketamine gives you trips, yeah? It achieves that.
Yeah, so ketamine, each psychedelic has a different kind of qualitative feel. Ketamine's different to many of the other psychedelics because it's not serotonergic, so it doesn't hit the serotonin receptors, it's glutamatergic, so it's a different system within the brain. And so what that means is that people that are taking, say, antidepressants like Prozac, they can keep taking their Prozac and get ketamine treatment. Whereas if they, say, are taking Prozac antidepressants and they want to have ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms, it's not recommended. It either doesn't work very well or there could be some contraindications. But with ketamine, you can still, keep taking your medications.
You haven't mentioned marijuana. Is that something that is used as well in therapeutic settings, or is that something it's not as psychedelic or mind altering and wouldn't accomplish the same thing? Because the THC does calm the mind, or it's psychoactive, but the CBD and I guess the THC as well opens up certain parts of the mind and quiets down the mind as well. But would that be another substance that's used in these settings?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. Thanks, Levi. Yes. So for me, cannabis is a psychedelic. Not everyone would say it was, and I'm not too worried about the word psychedelic because it was just made up, 60, 70 years ago. But cannabis is an ancient plant that has been used for centuries around the world, that has very, very profound effects on consciousness and on spirit and on the body to heal. And again, for decades, research was shut down around the world. Research was not allowed. If it was allowed in very tiny amounts, literally just a few kilograms a year in the world was allowed to be researched on a very low quality strain of cannabis, just one. Whereas in reality, there's thousands of strains. And so it's only really now that they're starting to do research, and they're finding it helps with things like epilepsy, like kind of ocular degeneration, like pain and anxiety, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So there are a number of people over here in America using cannabis in therapy, but only in states where it's been decriminalized. So where I live in New Jersey, we just decriminalized it. And literally 2 weeks ago,
for recreational use as
well?
Yeah,
for about a year or two,
New
it's
York
been available.
Well, right?
Yeah, New York, New Jersey, about the same. But, so now in New Jersey, I can go to a dispensary and buy cannabis without needing a diagnosis. Whereas in much of America, it's either completely illegal, and even for medical use, or you have to have a diagnosis. And
I thought most of America decriminalized. I didn't realize it's most still hasn't.
Yeah, most. I think probably only less than 10 states have decriminalized.
Really?
Maybe about 25, 30 states have medical marijuana available.
Okay.
But there's a couple of therapists that use it. One is called Daniel McQueen, and the other is called Raj Sajvi, both in Colorado, where cannabis has been legal and used therapeutically for over a decade. And so they use it with people fly in from all over the world to see these doctors and therapists to use cannabis, particularly for post-traumatic stress disorder. So they have a lot of military veterans, soldiers that have either traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma and addiction, and it's very, very powerful using cannabis in that therapeutic setting. Even if they've been using cannabis every day, just doing a particular blend of cannabis and having set and setting the environment they're in, and the person that's kind of with them holding space, it makes it a transformative experience. So this is something that I'm looking to do, and colleagues of mine in Israel, where I'm hoping to move next year, B'ezrat Hashem, they're doing cannabis-assisted therapy right now in Israel, because there's 110,000 people that have a license to use cannabis medically, particularly for post-traumatic stress disorder, because they were serving in the IDF.
Yeah.
This, this it does. I do understand the logic of this. I used cannabis quite extensively when I was sort of 17. I used to come home from school every day and, smoke a joint basically. And I do get what you're saying. It's definitely relaxing. It definitely opens you up. It definitely kind of puts you in a state of mind where there's more possibilities, where you see more possibilities, where you're not stuck in the same box that you are, prior to kind of smoking that. So I get a sense of what you're saying. There's psychedelics I never really tried. I did magic mushrooms once, but it didn't do much for me. But so I see the logic. I do see the logic in it.
Yeah.
There's something in there.
And typically, we recommend that people under the age of 25 don't use cannabis or psychedelics, because it can, affect the neuroplasticity and the brain development. But yeah, I use cannabis as well, Shaul, when I was a kid, a teenager, and I still do use it, and I kind of pretty much have done my entire life off and on, and it really has helped me I have depression and OCD, and at times I've had struggles with suicidal thinking over the years. So cannabis particularly has been extremely helpful for just allowing my brain to kind of change the circuitry, so it doesn't get stuck in a thought loop, where OCD or suicidal thinking could just be a thought loop, and it's hard to break out of it. And that's why people might self-harm or go to alcohol. So cannabis, from a harm reduction perspective, is a lot less harmful and a lot more beneficial for people.
No, definitely, I agree with that. My experience of cannabis versus alcohol is that alcohol, you become a little crazy. You can't think straight with alcohol. You're not thinking straight. But I think with cannabis, you're still thinking straight. You're not kind of losing your sense, so to speak. If anything, you're touching something deeper. And I think there is a big difference between the two. I think alcohol is more of an escape from kind of the life that you've got right now, whereas cannabis is more of a pointing to a deeper place.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of understanding it.
Yeah, that's my experience of it. I can't say more than my own experience.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think it really does reveal deeper parts of ourselves, like layers of an onion, or kind of levels of the soul. To be honest, I think it really gives us that. And it could be there's trauma in there, but also a lot of love and forgiveness and a sense of unity and consciousness of that life is a gift from God. The universe is amazing. It helps to kind of go, oh, why do I worry so much?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So with that, like you spoke about thought loops and OCD and trauma, and like it gives you a second to just calm down and think like, life's not so bad, and like I don't have to get caught up in like it breaks that vicious cycle of a thought loop. But then when you come down from the high, right, you're kind of back in the same place. Now you remember how it was when you were the substance was in your blood, but then post that. Right, when you come down from the high, integrating that into your life, or when you get stuck if you get stuck in another thought loop, how have you seen with yourself or with others, with clients or people that you work with, being able to keep that with them in a way? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and a lot of the companies that are moving into the space right now are developing tech platforms, wearables, and kind of telehealth therapy to help get the most benefit from the psychedelic experience afterwards, because the psychedelic, in a sense, is only the seed, the first part of the healing journey, and a lot of people use psychedelics just for recreational benefit, for spiritual reasons, emotional reasons, for pleasure reasons, and that's okay as long as they're safe, responsible, it doesn't hurt anybody or themselves. Then I believe that should be allowed. But the question of what to do after the trip. There's this concept of integration, which is, in a sense, looking at the experience of using psychedelics as the template for what came up, what did I realize, what questions do I now have? It's often not finding answers, it's finding questions, and how do I kind of change my life to better reflect and embody the experiences of how I saw myself during my trip, how I saw life during that trip, how I relate to my wife, my kids, and during that trip, how do I manifest that and embody that and change my life? And yeah, am I happy with my job? Do I still want to live here? Do I want to be more or less religious? You know, what is it I actually need my life to look like? So it kind of gives us a zoom out of our own life, where we get trapped in this little prison in our box that I'm David Drapkin and I'm a therapist and I do a lot of talking and blah, 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 to just connecting with, this universal kind of infinitude that lets me be more grateful to be alive and to love the trauma that I have and to love the depression that I have, because I'm alive and I have a chance to kind of work with that from a place of forgiveness.
I feel like you need a lot of that reflection post a session, because otherwise it will become something that, although it's not addictive chemically, but it's dependent. It could become a dependency, as in always liking that feeling of, hey, zooming, like you said, zooming out. It's an amazing feeling. And then you want to do it again because you zoom out and zoom out and zoom out.
Yeah.
I guess 90% of the work is being reflective post the session, so that you don't actually need that substance to bring you there, but it just kind of gives you a peek of what's available. So they're being reflective is integral. Otherwise, like it can become like something that you need to escape to or be dependent on in a way.
Yeah, and that's why quite a few people, once they've used psychedelics, maybe once, maybe 10 times, I don't know, they'll develop some practices in their life that help to keep them connected to that part of themselves that they connected with in the psychedelic trip. So it might be, I'm going to start davening in the morning, or I'm going to do meditation or yoga, or a lot of people do breath work, particularly holotropic breath work from Stan Grof, which developed in the 70s in Esalen in California when psychedelics were criminalized. So a lot of people put these practices into their life just to help them every day or once a week, being in nature, just come into contact with that part of themselves that is a bit quieter, a bit more accepting of life being crazy, a bit more loving of self, despite all of our flaws. And so it's infinite. Like, what do we do with that? We could just take a bath and read some poetry. You know, that in a sense could bring us back to that place. And once that channel in our brain has been opened, it's never really closed. In a sense, the network does reconfigure itself, but that experience and that memory of expansiveness, that always remains within us for us to tap back into. And you might have heard of this term, neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
So psychedelics have this primary concept of neuroplasticity. So like I said, the default mode
just
network.
Tell people what it is. You and I know what it is, but say a little more. Okay.
I'll do my best.
Well.
Tell me if this sounds all right, Shaul. So neuroplasticity is this concept of the brain being plastic, of the network that our brain uses in different parts of our life, different parts of our day, changes and should change, and that at different times we will access different parts of our brain for different reasons, whether I'm communicating with someone that I love or that I hate, or whether I'm working really hard to do something, or if I'm meditating. I'm kind of using different networks in my brain. So that shows us that there is plasticity. But at the same time,
one of the places where they talk about neuroplasticity is in brain damage, where the brain potentially has the ability to reconfigure itself a little bit, and use different parts of itself for the part that got damaged. Which is fascinating field, of understanding.
So that's the amazing thing with the brain, is able to, the nerve endings are able to kind of grow around other nerves that are broken and to find other parts to connect to. And that could be because of a traumatic brain injury. The brain kind of rewires, reconfigures, or it could be because of a psychedelic usage. It kind of reactivates the entire brain. And there's some amazing MRI images of the brain on psychedelics. And so, I think about neuroplasticity, our brain, but I feel like in the West, we are so obsessed with our brain and logic and the mind. There's actually a beautiful part of psychedelic healing and consciousness that isn't the brain. It's the body, and it's the spirit, and it's emotion. So I think of it as soul plasticity and heart plasticity and body plasticity, because all those parts of that make us whole, or through which we experience life, they all open up during psychedelics. And perhaps that is the primary, most unique part of the psychedelic experience compared to say Prozac medicines, is that we have a unification of body, mind, soul, and heart in that moment of using psychedelics, and that can continue. We are wired not just between the parts of our brain, but between the parts of soul and heart and body as well, which makes us a lot more at peace and powerful in life.
So I just want to say a couple of things on that. The first thing I want to say, and I want to make clear, you made it clear as well, but I want to make it clear for our listeners here, is that neither you nor we are suggesting anybody does anything illegal over here. But what you're saying is that you think these things should be legal, you know, and you think it's a shame that they're not legal. There are certain things that are legal, firstly, in various different places, but your feeling would be that it would be appropriate. There's no reason to criminalize them. Yes, they are criminalized, unfortunately, and then therefore you have to kind of follow the laws of the country. But you see that the reasons for doing so are spurious. You know, don't really have any basis. The second thing I wanted to say is that I do see a difference between indulgence, and I think Levi was pointing this earlier, the indulgence and growth and development. And I do think it depends on what the person's doing, or what the person's intent is. You know, somebody who just wants to, kind of like alcohol, you know, you just want to indulge in it and just get away from the world and just have that experience and then not go anywhere with it afterwards. That can be addictive because you need the next high. You never change, and you just need the next high. I think within the context of a focus of development and wanting to use this as a means of change, you know, that there could be a very meaningful use for these substances under those circumstances, with or without the assistance of a therapist. You know, I think if you just had a person who felt, well, these drugs could be helpful in terms of that, and experimented with them, but was looking to be reflective afterwards and see what they'd seen and see what they'd learned and see if things could become more deepened within their own self as a result of it, then I think what you're saying is there's real potential value in that.
Yeah, and there's different ways of using psychedelics for sure. You know, a lot of people that use, say, ecstasy, MDMA, raves, parties, you know, as I did in my early 20s, drum and bass music in Nottingham, where I was at university, had a great time, never hurt anyone or myself, kind of lucky to some extent because it wasn't that responsible, some of the, you know, what we were doing in our crew over there, but had a great time. But there, you know, and it was probably good for me in many respects to grow and expand. But if someone takes that same medication, MDMA medicine, sits down in a room after, say, thinking about it for the last couple of weeks, what is it I want to get from this? Why am I doing this? What do I need from this experience? They put some quiet music on, they've got a therapist with them, or they're just by themselves even. They've made some tea, they've gone to the toilet, they've got, you know, the room set up. They'll probably have a very, very profound experience. But it takes quite a lot of preparation and knowledge to do that in the right way. And because a lot of people won't know, you know, what medications can I be on so that I don't have a contraindication with MDMA, because it does activate the heart. So you do want to have a screening with a doctor really before you use MDMA. So it's probably going to end up being that it's going to stay in a clinical model for most of the world. Although over here in Oregon on the West Coast, they're developing their own psilocybin mushroom service, so that you don't need a diagnosis. You can just come and use it because you want to use it, but you still have to pass a screening exam with a medical professional. And then you can use a psilocybin either, say, in a clinical setting or in a nature-based setting or in probably a religious-based setting with someone there that's gone through a 120-hour training course. So that's how the Oregon model is going to go. Probably most of America will eventually be decriminalized, but that's different to legalized. So in, say, Portugal and Switzerland, those are the models that the world uses as the best forms of decriminalization and legalization of all drugs, including heroin. And they do show the outcomes there are much, much better than anywhere else in the world around overdoses and around helping people that get addicted get to services and helping them, you know, get their life back on track. So Portugal and Switzerland are great models for the rest of the world to look at, and Scandinavia as well.
What's the laws in those countries?
It's really that there are no criminal offenses for drug possession or use.
Really? Really? I
And
didn't know that.
yeah. And so, for example, in Switzerland, if someone becomes addicted to heroin, they can go to a chemist and get heroin and use it in a safe injecting site. But to get it for free from the government, they have to comply with a few other rules, such as getting health tests done, kind of sexually transmitted diseases, seeing the dentist, speaking with a job counselor, living in supportive housing, and helping them get their life back on track. So what they try and do there is they don't put them in prison. They don't give them a criminal record. They say, we'll give you clean, pure heroin so that you don't die from fentanyl, which is what 90,000 Americans died of here last year alone from using opioids. So they're using, here's pure heroin. It's not going to kill you. Virtually, you guaranteed that. But to get it, you've got to comply with all these things that's going to make you never want to use heroin and not need it anymore, because your life's going to be working in a much better way, and you're going to get therapy and housing and employment as well. We're going to help you get that together. And Portugal's the same, not quite. You've really got to be able to combine the getting rid of the criminalizing piece with the providing of more services and support piece as well. You need both hand in hand to work together, it seems.
Did you want to touch on these two questions? Or
actually, I wanted to maybe move on to the spiritual side of it. Is that what you were talking about?
The spiritual side, or or the using intentional self work.
No, I think we've touched on that.
Okay.
I do think we've touched on that. I think he's touched on sort of more recreational use and personal use. And
oh no, I was talking about more of using why wouldn't it be possible for a person to access these parts of their psyche?
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, yeah. So that is what I want. Yeah, that's the same thing to me.
Is that
okay.
weird? Okay.
Yeah. So I did want to talk for a minute. I mean, we talked about it in the previous podcast, and just kind of get your feedback on that as well, on about the sort of spiritual side of this, and and the Jewish side of it as well. So, Judaism, for example, not only allows alcohol, it encourages alcohol in certain circumstances. Like on a Friday night, when we sort of sanctify the Shabbat, you're meant to use wine, and the wine is there to sort of give you a nice feeling from which you can have a more spiritual experience. And so what's being suggested here is something a little bit similar, is that perhaps these substances can do the same thing. Perhaps they can do even better than alcohol. Perhaps they can go a step further than alcohol and sort of allow the brain to sort of free itself up, to relax, to be less of a master over you, let's say, and less of a master over the soul, and allow the soul to rise to the surface and to kind of be able to express itself more, and for you to experience sort of a deeper experience as a result of that. I think the question becomes, and I've sort of shot myself in the foot in start with in asking this question, is sort of, why can't one do that oneself? Why do you need substances? Why do we need something to allow us to do that? If the soul is there, if the human soul is there, surely it would be better to look for ways of releasing it, or ways of opening it up, that are just without the need of substances to sort of assist. What would you say about that?
Yeah, agree. I'm happy to talk about this piece. So our religion, thankfully, is one where we surf the wave of pleasure, and we don't, we're not too ascetic. So I'm thankfully we are allowed to use alcohol. We're encouraged to have sex and kind of pruvaru. So I think, both sex and alcohol are drugs, and they are addictive. And I've worked with clients that have both those addictions. But I think our religion, wants us to experience pleasure, and to know that the ability to experience pleasure comes from, a higher power, from Hashem, from a creator. And that experience of pleasure definitely doesn't have to depend on any external substance. It really can come from just from waking up in the morning, apart from for me right now, because I've got allergies, so it's not very nice waking up, but I still say modernity. But yeah, just literally life itself, seeing nature, can have transcendental consciousness attached to it. Seeing kids playing, or sunset, these are very transcendental levels of consciousness where we connect with soul and Hashem. So we go down, looking kind of like a, Malchut Shechina, and then there's also a line going all the way up to, Keter Ein Sof at the top. So this is a line of us really traversing all realms, and that we can experience that. So I had an experience once davening at the Kotel. I was about to Shuva, age 31, crying and bawling my eyes out and snot coming out my nose. I was not using any drugs, I promise. I was just making teshuva. I was just davening. I was just in awe of being alive and being a Jew. And some people get that from meditation, from yoga, from being on a silent retreat and fasting. So there's so many different ways. Breathwork's wonderful. Music and dance. I dance. I love dancing, and all of these things. There's limitless ways that we can connect with Hashem, with our soul, and just have that sense of being bigger than just this me and I. So who do we need drugs in that case? Do we need intoxicants? I feel like I wouldn't want to give them up in my life, but I really appreciate the challenge of knowing where and when and how much and with whom to use them or not use them. Because for me, that's a process of teshuva, and it's of making like having a relationship with different parts of myself. There's a part of me that would love to smoke a joint every single day. There is a part of me that would like to do that. But there's many other parts of me that know that it just can't work because I've got kids, because I've got a job, because I've got meetings, and because it wouldn't be good for me health-wise. And yeah, I might develop an addiction. So there's these other parts. And I think there's a beautiful dialogue that happens within us that tries to make sense of, in a sense, striking bargains. So how do I do it the right amount of times and in the right way, not too much? And ultimately, I do feel like there is maybe a final outcome where we've used them enough that we don't need them anymore, or at the very least, we can just have a break. So I've had periods of years when I've abstained from alcohol or cannabis or psychedelics, many years. And I think that is good in a sense for getting that perspective of, well, who am I really without anything at all? And that includes meat. So I'm kind of pescatarian now, but was vegan and vegetarian in the past for about 10 years. And that also really helps to get a sense of what's my body like when it's not digesting animal flesh. It just helps to get a sense of how does my body and brain and soul feel when I just let it be the way that it was made to be.
I tell you what's interesting, and I'm just going to kind of, in my mind at least, summarize what you've said here. I was, a couple of years ago, I was in Vermont with an uncle of my wife's, and we went skiing together, and we were on a chairlift going up the mountain, and he got out a joint, and he said, "Look, you're a rabbi. Do you mind if I smoke this?" And I said, "Well, as long as you share it with your friends, can't smoke on your own." So I was just interested to kind of see, because like I say, I had a period of sort of a year in my life where I really smoked a lot, and it was a very difficult period in my life, and it was because of that I was smoking it. It was really a little bit indulgent or escaping, just running away. I don't know that it enhanced my life at that point in my life, other than just it saved me from deeper pain and suffering, maybe. What was really interesting to me was, I kind of smoked it with him. It really didn't do very much for me. It did something for me in terms of the physical experience, but in terms of kind of how it made me feel or see the world or feel about myself. When I used to take it when I was 17, I felt so much better about myself, so much better about life, so much more comfortable with life. It was interesting to me to see that actually, to me, it's a development within myself that I'm kind of at a stage whereby I kind of do that naturally now. That I've just got that. I've got that okay feeling. I've got that feeling of the goodness of life, the goodness of the world, the goodness of myself. And so that sort of physical experience, or that is not a necessary enhancement. And I kind of hear a little bit, that's what you're saying there. It's quite personal, but what's really important to remember is the destination. The destination is God, let's say, to boil it down and make it simple. The destination is that spiritual experience. The destination is to awaken that godliness within ourselves, is to find that godliness and to find that spiritual experience. And there's so many ways to skin a cat. There's lots of ways to find that spiritual experience. For some people, this might be a very helpful thing. For others, maybe not. But there is the potential for this to be helpful. But at the same time, that doesn't mean to say that this is the only thing, or this is the best way, or this is the most meaningful way. It's one way. It's one way that's helpful for people. And for those that it's helpful, it can be really helpful. And as long as they remember that it's not the psychedelic, it's not the marijuana, it's not those things that do it. It's coming from within. It's you that did it. It's your spiritual nature. It's your spiritual truth. It's your godliness that you are enjoying and taking pleasure in, not the experience of the drugs. The drugs just kind of help you find that within yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really well expressed. And in a sense, the way you're speaking about it, Shaul, makes me think of them as doorways. In a sense, they're open, and what's behind that doorway? Well, whatever is within us,
is there. That's right.
And it's infinite, and it's totally infinite. There's no end to the number of doorways and the expansiveness of reality. And we don't need drugs for that, but they can help at times just to crack open that door.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good stopping point.
Yeah, I was maybe we can we can do another session another time, or maybe we can do a session actually.
Totally. Well, there's
over Zoom, Levi.
Over Zoom.
There is a way.
That's right.
There's Awaken in London that just opened, and I know the CEO and the whole team pretty well there. So if ever you wanted to do something in their clinic and do some recording there, we could do that. Okay. And that's using ketamine, and they're the best in the world for addiction treatment. And
well, I also wanted to, I mean, maybe not for now, maybe for a different time, but I was curious about microdosing, but maybe that's a different conversation. I assume it's a bit more. Yeah. Okay.
We could talk about it for a few minutes if you want. I'd like to just mention who I work for, just to drop in the websites for people.
Yeah, sure.
If you want to ask me about that, and then I'll just
if people want to find out more about what you do and how to get involved, if they feel like this is something that can be helpful for them in their lives, where should they go? What should they check out? How should they get in contact?
Yeah, I'm happy for people to reach out to me personally on LinkedIn. It's the platform I use the most, David Drapkin. And the company I work for is called Psychedelics Today. We're primarily an education and training company. So we've got a podcast that I do with sometimes with my team. So you can check out that on all your podcast channels, Psychedelics Today. But we also do trainings, and we've got about a dozen trainings we've developed looking at totally different subjects to do with psychedelics. And that website is called psychedelicEducationCenter.com. So we've got a 12-month training we just developed. We've got a 9-week training we have, and then lots of kind of few-hour trainings that you can check out. And just to say, I'm planning on making Aliyah next year, and I'm speaking with other organizations and friends in Israel about developing some projects in Israel, because there's a lot of good work to do over there. So happy to speak to anyone that's particularly interested in that angle.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you for your time today. We've really enjoyed it. Very enlightening.
Yeah, very interesting.
And it's maybe we'll be in touch with something. You've still got a few more things to ask you, so maybe we'll have you on again if you're up for it.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving world within psychedelics, and I love being in it. And great chat. Seriously, I really appreciate how open-minded you are. And just coming from that place of compassion and openness. Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.